It started with something simple. A flag fluttering quietly in the morning breeze. The kind of thing you'd expect to see in any suburban neighborhood, a small symbol of pride, tucked neatly in front of a well-kept home. The house belonged to Daniel Reeves, a retired firefighter who had moved to Maple Drive for peace and quiet after 30 years of service. His days were simple: coffee at sunrise, gardening by noon, and a quiet evening on the porch watching the world go by. But in Maple Drive Estates, peace was a fragile illusion. Behind the manicured lawns and identical mailboxes lurked an authority stronger than any government. The Homeowners Association, led by its infamous president, Karen Ellsworth. Karen was the kind of woman who saw the neighborhood as her personal kingdom. Every flower bed, every mailbox, every fence color was, in her mind, part of a grand design that only she understood. She took pride in enforcing the rules, not to maintain order, but to maintain control. When Daniel installed his new flagpole, a sturdy aluminum pole with a 456 American flag, he didn't think twice. He'd flown a flag outside every home he'd ever owned. To him, it wasn't decoration, it was respect. For the first few days, the flag waved quietly in the wind. Neighbors noticed it, nodded, even smiled. But there was one pair of eyes that narrowed instead. From her porch 3 houses down, Karen watched. She watched the way the flag swayed, how it glinted in the sunlight, how it stood just a little taller than the rest of the neighborhood's uniform symmetry. She saw not patriotism but defiance, and defiance was something she couldn't tolerate. That afternoon, she went straight to her office, a spare bedroom she'd converted into her OA command center. Within hours, she had dug through the community bylaws. Old, yellowed pages she'd rewritten years ago to include more restrictions than anyone could remember agreeing to. And there it was, a clause about unauthorized exterior structures. It had nothing to do with flags, really. It was meant to prevent large decorative inflatables and unsanctioned garden sculptures. But Karen didn't care about intent, only about interpretation. By the next morning, a letter appeared in Daniel's mailbox. Official HOA stationery. Cold, formal, threatening in tone. It demanded the removal of the flagpole within 7 days, citing violation of property aesthetics and community standards. Daniel read the letter twice, his jaw tightening. He wasn't the kind of man who sought conflict, but this struck a nerve. The flag wasn't an ornament. It was a reminder of every friend he'd lost in service, of the smoke, the heat, and the courage it took to run into burning buildings while others ran out. Still, he wasn't impulsive. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting, to speak his case calmly, to reason with them. Surely, he thought, there was room for understanding. But the meeting was anything but civil. Karen ran it like a courtroom, with herself as the judge and jury. She presented her case with papers, photos, and citations. The other board members sat quietly, nodding as if hypnotized. When Daniel spoke, his words barely made it into the minutes before Karen shut him down with the tap of her pen. She didn't just reject his request to keep the flagpole. She doubled down. She announced that if the pole wasn't removed by the following Monday, the HOA would fine him $250 per day and take further legal action if necessary. The room went silent. Even those who had supported Karen for years shifted uncomfortably. But no one spoke up. No one ever did. When Daniel walked out of that meeting, he wasn't angry. Not yet. He was disappointed. In the board, in his neighbors, in the quiet cowardice that had taken root in the people around him. He went home, looked at the flag fluttering in the twilight, and made a decision. He wasn't taking it down. Days passed. Karen's letters grew more frequent, each one more severe than the last. Then came the fines, automatic deductions through the HOA billing system. Daniel ignored them. He knew they couldn't enforce payment without a court order, but he also knew Karen wouldn't stop until she got one. One afternoon, as he mowed his lawn, he noticed Karen standing at the edge of his driveway, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of his property. Not once did she meet his eyes. She didn't need to. Her smirk said everything. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some whispered that Daniel was reckless for challenging the OA. Others quietly admired him. A few even placed small flags of their own, though none as bold as his. Karen noticed, of course. And to her, that was proof of her worst fear, loss of control. By the end of the week, she called an emergency HOA session to authorize legal escalation. But what she didn't know was that Daniel had already contacted a local veterans advocacy group. And when they heard his story, they didn't just offer support, they offered a platform 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up in front of Daniel's house. A man stepped out with a camera, followed by a woman with a microphone. The logo on the side of the vehicle said it all Channel 6 News. By that evening, the story had aired across the state. Veteran threatened with fines for flying American flag. The footage showed the flag waving proudly, the HOA letters stacked on the table, and Daniel's quiet dignity as he explained the situation. The backlash was instant. Emails flooded the HOA office. Calls came from journalists, politicians, even veterans' organizations. Karen's inbox filled faster than she could delete messages. Online, the story spread like wildfire. Karen bans American flag became a headline that would haunt her forever. But the storm had only begun, because Karen wasn't the type to back down, and Daniel wasn't the type to surrender. And as the cameras returned the next day, Maple Drive found itself at the center of a war between pride and power, freedom and control, one man's principle and one woman's obsession. The flag still waved in the wind that morning, but this time everyone was watching, and Karen was planning her next move. By the morning after the news report aired, Maple Drive was unrecognizable. The quiet suburban calm had been replaced with the hum of camera crews, curious onlookers, and angry whispers. Cars that had once crept silently through the neighborhood now slowed to take photos of Daniel's home. His flag, rippling proudly in the breeze, had become more than a decoration. It was a statement. To the community, it was a symbol of resistance. To Karen, it was a declaration of war. She watched it all unfold from behind her drawn curtains. The news segment had painted her as the villain, a controlling HOA president bullying a veteran over a simple flag. She'd spent years building her image as the protector of property values, the woman who kept the neighborhood pristine and respectable. Now, overnight, she was being mocked online as the latest OA Karen. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Some calls were from furious residents demanding an emergency meeting. Others were from news outlets seeking comment. But the worst were from total strangers, hundreds of them, calling to insult, threaten, and ridicule. The story had gone viral, spreading from local TV to national networks. Yet beneath her embarrassment was something far more dangerous: anger. Karen had always believed she could outlast anyone. She wasn't about to be humiliated by one man and his flag, so instead of backing down, she doubled down. That afternoon, she sent out a formal OA memo to every resident of Maple Drive Estates. It was written in her usual, coldly professional tone. All homeowners are reminded that non-approved exterior structures remain in violation of the community covenant. The association will pursue all remedies necessary to maintain community standards. But beneath that formality was venom. It was her way of reminding everyone that she was still in charge. When Daniel received his copy, he simply folded it once and set it aside. He had bigger things to worry about now. The attention had drawn supporters, but also critics. Some accused him of exploiting the situation for fame. Others accused him of staging the conflict. The noise was relentless. Reporters camped on the street. Trucks with satellite dishes parked near his mailbox. Even the mayor's office had issued a statement supporting the rights of homeowners to display the national flag. And while Daniel tried to stay composed, Karen was working behind the scenes. She began collecting signatures from the most loyal HOA members, those who owed her favors, those who feared her influence. With every signature, she inched closer to a plan she'd been forming quietly: a lawsuit. If she couldn't silence Daniel with fines, she'd drown him in legal pressure. She spent her evenings at her desk, drafting motions, contacting the HOA attorney, and combing through bylaws for loopholes. Her argument wasn't about the flag itself anymore. It was about the flagpole. She claimed it violated height restrictions for permanent structures. She knew the optics were bad, but she didn't care. If she could prove the flagpole was illegal, she could force its removal through court order. The residents noticed the shift in her behavior. She stopped greeting people. Her once perfect garden went untended. She had turned her entire life into a campaign of retaliation. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had begun to split. Half of Maple Drive stood with Daniel, waving flags of their own, small or large, out of quiet solidarity. The other half, fearful of HOA retribution, stayed silent or whispered about the chaos the attention had brought. Cars lined up at the entrance, reporters filming interviews, strangers walking through to take selfies. The community that had once prided itself on control was now completely out of it. Karen's fury grew each day the flag still stood. One morning, she decided to act on her own. As dawn broke, she marched to Daniel's property line with her phone camera recording, determined to document a violation she could use in court. But what she found waiting for her was not a flimsy flagpole. It was a fortress of support. 3 other neighbors had joined Daniel overnight. They'd installed their own flags, smaller but identical in design. One of them was a veteran too, another a schoolteacher. The row of colors fluttering in the wind made a statement that no bylaw could silence. Karen stood frozen, her video recording every humiliating second of her realization. She stopped recording before anyone noticed her, but it was too late. One of the neighbors had seen her standing there and snapped a photo. By evening, the image was online. Karen caught spying on veterans' home. The comments were brutal. Memes spread faster than she could report them. Within a week, her name was trending, her face plastered on screenshots and edited clips. People sent pizzas to her address. Others mailed toy flags to the OA office. But the attention didn't break her. It hardened her. She filed the lawsuit. The HOA officially sued Daniel Reeves for unauthorized exterior installation, demanding the removal of his flagpole and repayment of accrued fines, now totaling nearly $40,000. The filing shocked the residents, infuriated the media, and triggered a new round of national outrage. Daniel didn't respond publicly, but his lawyer did. He filed a countersuit, citing federal protections that allowed homeowners to display the American flag regardless of HOA restrictions. And when the press got hold of that, the story reignited with even more intensity. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Maple Drive anymore. It was about every neighborhood across the country where HOAs overstepped their bounds. Daniel became a reluctant symbol for homeowners who felt bullied by the systems meant to protect them. Karen, on the other hand, was drowning. Sponsors dropped her HOA newsletter. Her own board began questioning her leadership. Some even tried to call for her resignation. But she refused. She would rather drag the entire neighborhood down with her than admit defeat. The day the court date was announced, she stood outside her home and glared at Daniel's flag, still waving, untouched, proud as ever. The fabric seemed to taunt her, to remind her that for all her power, she couldn't stop what it represented. For Daniel, though, the pressure was mounting. Reporters still came daily. Strangers left messages of support, but also threats. His quiet refuge had turned into a circus. And yet, every evening, when the wind caught that flag just right, he felt a calm he couldn't explain. Because deep down, he knew this fight wasn't about property lines or paperwork. It was about principle. About standing for something even when everyone around you is too afraid to. As the court date drew closer, both sides dug in deeper. The HOA pooled money for legal fees. Daniel's supporters launched fundraisers online, and Maple Drive, once a picture of suburban perfection, now stood divided between those who valued peace and those who valued freedom. By the time the judge's gavel would finally fall, the entire country would be watching. And Karen Ellsworth, once untouchable, would find herself in a spotlight brighter than any she'd ever wanted. Because when the law and the light of public opinion collide, the truth doesn't stay buried for long. By the time the court date was announced, Maple Drive had become a symbol of something far larger than anyone living there could comprehend. What had started as a small neighborhood dispute was now a full-blown national conversation about freedom, control, and what it truly meant to live in a community. Every morning, news vans lined both sides of the street. Reporters stood in front of Daniel's house, their microphones catching the sound of the flag flapping proudly above them. The image became iconic. A single flag waving against the backdrop of a quiet suburb, standing tall in the face of bureaucratic arrogance. Karen hated every second of it. She'd gone from queen of the HOA to a public spectacle overnight. The neighbors she once controlled now crossed the street to avoid her. Her inbox overflowed with hate mail, and her phone was a minefield of notifications she refused to open. Even her family had begun urging her to stop, to drop the lawsuit and move on. But Karen Ellsworth was not the kind of woman who gave up. Not when she believed she was right, and certainly not when the world told her she was wrong. She saw herself as misunderstood, the last defender of order in a world that was losing respect for authority. And so she doubled down once again. The HOA newsletter, once filled with gardening tips and community events, transformed into a manifesto of self-righteous justification. In her latest issue, she wrote of maintaining the beauty and uniformity of Maple Drive, warning residents about those who seek to bring chaos through self-interest. She never mentioned Daniel by name, but everyone knew. The residents rolled their eyes. Some laughed. Others unsubscribed entirely. But the real blow came from outside the neighborhood, from the cameras that had never stopped rolling. National outlets picked up the story. Talk shows debated it. Veterans groups held rallies in support of Daniel. Even politicians began to weigh in, some calling for federal protections against HOA overreach. Every mention, every segment, every headline made Karen's position weaker. Yet, the lawsuit continued. As the date approached, Daniel tried to live as normally as possible. He still tended his garden, waved to supportive neighbors, and ignored the cameras when he could. But there was a heaviness in him, the kind that comes from knowing a simple act of pride had turned into a storm of conflict. He'd never wanted fame. He only wanted to be left alone. Still, he couldn't deny what the flag had come to represent. Each time he stepped outside and saw it waving, he thought of those who couldn't fly theirs, of every veteran who'd been silenced by rules and regulations, of every homeowner too scared to stand up to an overbearing HOA. The fight was bigger than him now. As word spread about the upcoming court case, supporters began to visit. Veterans in uniform stood on the sidewalks, saluting the flag. Families dropped off meals and notes of encouragement. The air buzzed with anticipation and quiet defiance. But Karen saw it differently. To her, they were invaders, outsiders disrupting her community, her order. She filed complaints with the city about excessive gatherings and public disturbances. She called the police multiple times, only to be told that as long as no one broke the law, there was nothing they could do. Her frustration reached a boiling point. The night before the first court hearing, she couldn't sleep. She walked from room to room, glancing out her windows at the faint glow of Daniel's flag illuminated by a soft spotlight. It infuriated her, that single beam of light cutting through the darkness like a silent rebuke. At 2 a.m., she made a decision she'd soon regret. She left her house quietly, wrapped in a coat, holding a small pair of wire cutters. Her footsteps crunched on the pavement as she crept toward Daniel's yard. The neighborhood was silent. Only the faint rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind broke the stillness. She reached the base of the flagpole, trembling with anger. Her hand rose, cutters poised to snap the small wire powering the light. But as the blades met the wire, a burst of illumination flooded the yard. Motion sensors activating, cameras clicking to life. Karen froze, caught in the glare. She backed away, panicking, then ran. But it was too late. The footage captured everything. The HOA president caught in the act of tampering with the very flag she'd sworn to remove legally. By dawn, Daniel's security system had uploaded the video to the cloud, and within hours someone leaked it online. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The footage spread across every platform, every network, every feed. HOA president caught sabotaging veterans' flag became the headline of the day. Comment sections exploded with outrage. Reporters camped outside Karen's house. Her phone rang nonstop. Within 24 hours, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. For the first time, Karen's allies turned against her. They demanded her resignation, citing misconduct and reputational damage. She tried to defend herself, to claim she'd been inspecting the area for safety violations. But no one believed her. By the end of the day, Karen Ellsworth was officially removed as HOA president. But even as she was forced out, she refused to apologize. She told anyone who would listen that she'd been set up, that Daniel had orchestrated the entire thing for sympathy and fame. Her words fell on deaf ears. Meanwhile, Daniel remained quiet. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He simply kept his flag flying. The lawsuit was still scheduled, but now the HOA's case was crumbling. Their credibility was gone, their leadership disgraced, and public opinion firmly against them. The board's new acting president, a mild-mannered accountant named Stephen Ward, was already considering dropping the case altogether. But Karen wouldn't stop there. Even without the title, she wasn't done fighting. She still had influence, still had allies, and in her mind she still had something left to prove. So, as the world moved on and the neighborhood began to heal, she began to plan her next move quietly, something bigger, bolder, and far more desperate. Because to Karen, this was no longer about the flag or the HOA or even her reputation. It was about power and revenge. And when she made her move, she'd make sure the whole country was watching again. After her removal from the HOA presidency, Karen Ellsworth vanished from sight, but only for a while. For the first time in years, her porch lights stayed off. Her perfectly trimmed hedges grew wild, her mailbox overflowed, and her presence faded from the rhythm of Maple Drive. Neighbors whispered that she'd moved away, humiliated by the fallout. Others claimed she'd been seen driving through the neighborhood late at night, watching, waiting. In truth, Karen was still there, secluded inside her house, blinds drawn tight, stewing in resentment. Her name had become a national punchline. Memes of her face captioned with, "Oe Karen Vess." The flag had spread everywhere. She'd been interviewed by no one, invited by no network, and her attempt to defend herself on social media had only made things worse. Every post she made was flooded with thousands of angry comments calling her un-American, controlling, or worse. But humiliation can be a powerful motivator, and Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. For weeks, she gathered information, not about Daniel, but about the system itself. She scoured OA forums, legal documents, and online groups dedicated to property law. Slowly, she began to rebuild a network of supporters, other AOA leaders, frustrated board members, and individuals who sympathized with her version of events. She called it the Community Integrity Coalition, a private Facebook group for homeowners defending neighborhood order. To the untrained eye, it was harmless, a group of people venting about messy lawns and broken mailboxes. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely, a digital army united by one shared belief, that people like Daniel Reeves were the beginning of chaos. Karen was patient. She watched the headlines fade, the public outrage move on, and the attention around Maple Drive slowly disappear. Then, once the cameras were gone, she made her move. It started small. Anonymous letters appeared in neighbors' mailboxes, warning that, without proper enforcement, Maple Drive's property values could plummet. Flyers appeared on lampposts reminding residents that unauthorized flags, lights, and decorations were still technically against community rules. The new HOA president, Stephen Ward, tried to calm everyone. He assured residents that no new enforcement would take place and that they were rewriting the bylaws to make flag displays permanently allowed. But Karen wasn't trying to win legally anymore. She was trying to win psychologically. She wanted fear back. The letters worked. Some residents began quietly removing their flags. Others started questioning whether supporting Daniel had been worth the chaos. The sense of unity that had once pulsed through Maple Drive began to fracture again. Meanwhile, Daniel remained unaware of Karen's growing influence. He believed the fight was over. His countersuit was still active, but with the HOA leadership crumbling, his lawyer expected a quiet settlement. The neighborhood had calmed, the cameras were gone, and for the first time in months, he felt peace. But peace in Maple Drive never lasted long. One evening, as Daniel was watering his garden, he noticed a car idling across the street, engine running, lights off. It stayed there for a few minutes, then drove away. The next night, it returned. A different car, then another. He thought little of it at first, but soon the pattern became undeniable. Someone was watching his house. He installed additional cameras, upgraded his security system, and tried to ignore the unease growing in his chest. Then, one morning, he found something in his yard. A small wooden sign staked into the ground, painted in red letters, show as protect property, not propaganda. The words hit like a slap. He knew who was behind it. Maybe not directly, but the message was unmistakable. It was Karen's voice, echoing through new mouths. She had found a way to continue her crusade, not through power, but through influence. Within days, more signs appeared around the neighborhood. Keep our streets orderly. No unauthorized displays. Preserve Maple Drive. They weren't official, but they carried weight. The once friendly streets were turning cold again. Karen from the shadows watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. Her plan was simple. She didn't need the OA title. She only needed to remind people that her vision of order was still alive. And as tension built once more, she began feeding stories to local blogs under fake names. Stories claiming Daniel's supporters were harassing neighbors, that the flags were causing divisions, that Maple Drive was on the verge of collapse. The lies spread easily. They always do. Daniel began receiving anonymous complaints, letters accusing him of disturbing the peace, of politicizing the neighborhood. Even though the HO no longer supported such claims, the constant noise wore on him. He started keeping his curtains drawn, avoiding interviews, trying to shield his family from the resurgence of hostility. But while Karen's smear campaign gained traction locally, she underestimated something the internet never forgets: One evening, a journalist researching OA abuse stumbled across her old public posts and connected them to the new Integrity Coalition. Screenshots spread quickly, exposing her as the orchestrator of the renewed attacks on Daniel and other homeowners like him. The story exploded again. Disgraced president behind anti-flag movement. Suddenly, all the progress she'd made in secret unraveled in a single day. Her online group was flooded with backlash. Members left in droves. News outlets reached out again, this time with sharper questions. The pressure mounted, and once more, the walls began closing in. Karen's house became a fortress, shades drawn, cameras turned off, phone disconnected. She refused to speak to reporters, friends, or even family. But those close enough to her could see it. The obsession had consumed her entirely. And yet, despite the exposure, Karen still wasn't finished. She'd lost her reputation, her power, and her following. But she hadn't lost her drive for vengeance. Because as far as she was concerned, Daniel Reeves hadn't just embarrassed her. He had destroyed her life, and in her mind, the only way to reclaim control was to take him down one last time. The air on Maple Drive had grown tense again, the kind of tension that hums in the background of every morning routine. Cars slowed when passing Daniel Reeves's home. Whispers lingered at mailboxes, and the once vibrant display of flags had thinned to just a few brave holdouts. The story that had once united the neighborhood was beginning to fade into fatigue. People were tired of the drama, tired of the spotlight, tired of the fight. And in that exhaustion, Karen Ellsworth found her final opening. After being exposed as the shadow behind the renewed campaign, she didn't disappear. She adapted. If she couldn't sway public opinion online, she'd twist it locally. Quietly, subtly, she began reaching out to sympathetic neighbors again, not under her name, but through proxies. She offered to advise certain board members on policy drafts. She sent out anonymous surveys about neighborhood satisfaction. Each form was worded carefully, each statistic crafted to suggest that Maple Drive had declined under Daniel's influence. The numbers, though fabricated, told a convincing story: rising complaints, declining property values, and a neighborhood split by unnecessary displays. Her goal wasn't truth, it was erosion. Daniel didn't see it coming at first. His focus had turned inward. His family, his work, the quiet hope that things were settling down. The news cycle had moved on to new scandals, new controversies. His flag still flew proudly on the same sturdy pole, though the once frequent honks of support had grown rare. But beneath the calm, a storm was forming. A few neighbors who had once stood with him began avoiding eye contact. Conversations that used to end in laughter now ended awkwardly. The HOA board, under growing pressure from concerned members, called an emergency meeting to evaluate community guidelines. When the notice arrived, Daniel's stomach sank. He attended the meeting out of principle, though he dreaded what he already suspected. The board gathered in the small community hall, the same place where the first conflict had exploded months ago. Only this time there were no reporters, no cameras, no cheering crowd. Just a few dozen tired homeowners and an agenda that promised restoration of community order. Karen wasn't on the board anymore, but her fingerprints were all over the new proposal. It didn't mention flags directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, it introduced vague restrictions on exterior decor that causes division or disrupts neighborhood harmony. It was a loophole dressed as compromise, and everyone knew it. The motion passed by a narrow margin. Legally, Daniel's flag was still safe under state and federal law, but the social message was clear: the community wanted silence again. Order, uniformity. And while they couldn't force him to take the flag down, they could make life increasingly uncomfortable. It started with noise complaints. Then yard citations for unapproved edging. Trash cans slightly moved from the curb. Little things that didn't matter individually but wore him down collectively. Daniel refused to yield. Every morning the flag went up at sunrise. Every night it came down, folded neatly and respectfully. It wasn't about defiance anymore. It was about endurance, proving that the spirit of a neighborhood wasn't defined by its rules, but by the people willing to stand for something beyond them. Yet, even endurance has limits. One evening just after dusk, Daniel noticed the flag swaying oddly in the wind. He stepped outside to check, and froze. The pole was bent. The base screws had been loosened. Someone had tampered with it. A surge of anger rose in him, but beneath it was sadness. Not for himself, but for what Maple Drive had become. The quiet cul-de-sac where kids once rode bikes and neighbors waved had turned into a battlefield of pettiness and fear. He reported the vandalism to local police. They took photos, promised to investigate, but he knew how it would end with a file, a shrug, and no resolution. Still, Daniel refused to back down. He repaired the pole, reinforced it, and the next morning, the flag was back where it belonged, higher than before. But unbeknownst to him, that single act of resilience would become the spark for one final, explosive confrontation. A week later, Karen made her return, not quietly this time, but publicly. She arrived at the HOA's monthly meeting with a stack of documents and a camera crew she had hired herself. Her goal? To clear her name and restore order to the community. She claimed she'd been slandered, that the news had twisted her story, that she was simply defending HOA rules, that everyone had agreed to when they bought their homes. Her voice trembled with righteous conviction as she addressed the crowd. The same crowd that once applauded Daniel. But the room was different now. Divided, half sympathetic, half silent. When her footage went live online, edited to paint herself as a victim of media bias and neighborhood chaos, it spread like wildfire in the echo chambers that always welcomed controversy. Comments poured in, some supportive, many skeptical. But one local journalist, the same who had exposed her previous smear campaign, saw through the act and reached out to Daniel again. This time, however, Daniel was hesitant. He didn't want another storm. He didn't want cameras back on his street. He just wanted peace. Until one morning changed everything. A video surfaced, grainy, low quality, captured by a passing car. It showed a shadowy figure, late at night, near Daniel's home. The person appeared to be tampering with his flagpole. The same night it had been vandalized. The frame froze for a brief second, and though blurry, the outline was unmistakable. Karen's shape, her distinctive short hair and coat, the way she held her phone flashlight. Within hours, the footage spread. This time, no one could defend her. Not even her remaining supporters. Karen's attempt to reclaim her reputation collapsed instantly. The same networks that had once aired her defiance now ran headlines of her hypocrisy. Disgraced OA president caught sabotaging homeowner's flag. The neighborhood turned silent again. But this silence was different. Heavier. Police cars arrived at Karen's house that afternoon. She wasn't arrested, but she was questioned for hours. When she returned home, she didn't step outside again. Curtains closed, lights off. Maple Drive had reached its breaking point, and though Daniel had technically won, the victory felt hollow. The street was scarred. Friendships fractured, trust broken, unity lost. The flag still waved proudly in his yard, but its meaning had changed. It no longer represented rebellion. It represented resilience, the endurance to stay true even when surrounded by bitterness. As summer faded into autumn, Daniel began rebuilding in small ways. He hosted barbecues, helped repair fences, donated to local causes. Slowly, neighbors started coming back around. The tension softened. Karen, however, remained isolated, her house unsold, her reputation beyond repair. But Daniel knew the story wasn't quite over yet. Because people like Karen didn't disappear, they waited. They reemerged. They found new causes. And somewhere behind her drawn curtains, he could almost feel it. That quiet, obsessive pulse of resentment still alive in the dark. Months passed, and the story of Maple Drive slowly sank beneath the tides of newer headlines. The viral chaos that once lit up national screens had burned out, leaving only the faint embers of memory. But within that silence, something remarkable began to grow. The neighborhood that had been fractured by rules and pride was quietly rebuilding itself. The fences that once divided neighbors became conversation points for repair. The lawns that had been subjects of complaint turned into spaces for shared laughter once more. The same people who had once whispered judgment now offered help, trimming hedges, watering gardens, watching each other's pets. Daniel Reeves didn't plan it that way. He didn't call meetings or make speeches. He simply lived the same way he always had, quietly, firmly, and with respect for what mattered most. The flag still flew in his yard every morning, a small ritual that had transformed from defiance into peace. The scars of the conflict, however, never fully vanished. Every so often, someone new would move into the neighborhood, unaware of the history, and someone else would whisper, "That's the house from the flag's story." The words hung in the air like folklore, not a warning but a reminder. Karen Ellsworth remained in her home, though no one saw her much anymore. The once pristine garden had become overgrown, her car unmoved for weeks, her mail piling up. Her reign as HOA president was long over, and the once fearful respect she commanded had dissolved into pity. Yet there were rumors. Some said she was planning to move away. Others said she was trying to sell the house quietly. A few believed she was still in contact with small OA groups online, though under fake names. But most people had stopped caring. The community had moved on. She hadn't. Still, Daniel often thought about her. Not out of anger, but curiosity. He wondered how someone could pour so much of their soul into control, only to lose everything to it. He wondered whether she saw the irony, that in trying to protect her idea of order, she had destroyed it completely. One crisp November morning, the quiet of Maple Drive broke with the sound of construction. A crew arrived at the entrance of the neighborhood, installing a new stone sign with carved lettering. Maple Drive, a community of neighbors. It wasn't fancy, but it meant something. A gesture of closure. That evening, as Daniel sat on his porch, he noticed a flicker of movement across the street. Karen's curtains were open for the first time in months. The light from inside her house revealed her figure. Thinner, older, but unmistakable. She stood silently, looking out toward Daniel's yard, where the flag swayed gently in the breeze. For a moment, they simply existed there. Two people divided by a long, bitter history, bound now by the same silence. She didn't step outside. She didn't wave. But she didn't look away either. And in that stillness, Daniel realized something. That victory had never been about proving someone wrong. It had been about outlasting hate with patience, replacing resentment with steadiness, and standing firm without shouting. The camera crews were long gone. The neighbors no longer argued about bylaws or paint colors. And the flag, the same one that started it all, had become more than a symbol of freedom. It had become a marker of endurance, proof that even in the smallest corners of suburban life, principle mattered. A few weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. It stayed there for months, the price dropping steadily until one morning it was gone. No one saw her leave. No one helped her pack. The moving truck came early, and by sunrise, she was gone, leaving behind only silence and a reputation that would echo through the community for years to come. When new owners moved in, they didn't know the full story. They only knew bits and pieces, that the house across from Daniel's had been involved in some kind of HOA incident. Years ago. It became a story told at block parties and neighborhood gatherings, usually with laughter and disbelief. And through it all, Daniel stayed. He repainted his porch, fixed the garden, and helped organize small gatherings at the community park. His quiet consistency became a model for the new HOA leadership, a reminder that rules were meant to serve people, not control them. Maple Drive slowly became what it had always claimed to be, a community. But every so often, when Daniel looked at the flag fluttering against the pale blue morning sky, he remembered what it had cost to keep it there. Freedom, he realized, wasn't just about rights on paper. It was about courage. The quiet kind that doesn't seek recognition. The kind that endures the noise, the anger, the isolation, and still chooses to stand firm. It was about neighbors who rediscovered empathy. About resilience that didn't come from confrontation, but from calm persistence. About the lessons learned when one person's obsession meets another's patience. And maybe, just maybe, about forgiveness. Because even though Karen had brought turmoil, she had also revealed something deeper. That the true strength of a neighborhood wasn't in its rules or its aesthetics, but in its ability to heal after division. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the flag caught the last streaks of gold light. It shimmered gently, its edges worn from months of weather, but still strong. Daniel watched it for a long moment, then turned off his porch light. A quiet gesture, a full circle moment. The neighborhood rested, peacefully this time, and for the first time in a long while, Maple Drive truly felt like home again.